Well, let's go back to the very beginning. Leonard, talk a little bit about how this show came to be.
It almost did not come to be. We originally did it for ABC, and Don wasn't a figure in it. It was designed for Tom Poston, and essentially the same script. And ABC did not like it, and Dan Melnick and Dick Dorso, who were representing Talent Associates, company in which I was a partner, and David Susskind, said, let us do a rewrite. It'll work. And they did a rewrite, and Dan said, if you don't like this, you can have your money back. And within 24 hours, they asked for the $7,500. And now we had a show at the end of the pilot season, and only one potential customer, NBC, who had Don Adams under contract. Everyone was fearfully concerned that if we didn't do this, we'd have to close down the company if we couldn't sell this. And Dick Dorso was the most apprehensive. And he would call me every day. A meeting had been set up in California to meet with Grant Tinker if Grant Tinker liked the script. And Dick would call me every day and say, you've got to change it. And I said, well, I will change some of the things because I know Don is much more verbal than Tom, and I can do that. But it's such a solid script. He said, no, you got to do more than that. And over the 2 weeks, he pursued me tenaciously, and I put the door sequence in and some other things. And finally, the meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I did not know Dick Dorso, and I had never met Grant Tinker. And the three of us were sitting, Dick was to my left, about 6 feet away, and we were both facing Grant in Dick's hotel room. And we went through a lot of amenities, and finally Grant said, why don't we get down to Get Smart? He said, I read it last night again, and I read it this morning, and I love it. And Dick said, don't worry, Leonard can fix it. And this conversation went on, and I suddenly realized they're not hearing each other. And I tried to reach out with my leg to tap Dick, and it was beyond me, and I fell out of the chair. Well, I was laughing so much, it interrupted them finally. And I explained to them we had a deal. And so historically, that is the show. Beginning.
Can I just add one thing to it? I later found out from Grant that they had spent all their money for development for that season. There was no money left. And he called up Warner and said, I just read a pilot script that's so funny, we've got to find the money to do it. So it wasn't just that Grant loved the script, he really had to fight to find the money to shoot it.
I wasn't aware of that.
Unfortunately, Buck Henry couldn't join us tonight, but I was curious about sort of how the concept came to he and Mel Brooks. How did that whole
Well, actually, Dan Melnick, who was in here as well, was instrumental. It was Dan who thought we could satirize the then spy craze. And he first had got Mel, and then Mel wanted a writing partner, and he got Buck. And they did this rather ingenious script. Essentially, the pilot is their work, and Buck created the Cone of Silence, Mel the shoe phone, two invaluable pieces. And it was hard to understand why ABC had turned it down. And eventually we heard an explanation that they felt both Dan and David Susskind were serious. And they couldn't possibly produce a comedy. They didn't judge by the script, the content. They were suspect. Anyhow, it was a tribute to an idea of Dan's ingeniously developed by Buck and Mel.
And you said the original script was not written for Don, but written for
Tom Poston. That's why it was much more physical than verbal. And I had worked with Don many times on the Steve Allen Show, and then he had done the Bill Dana Show, and that voice was so distinctive and so marvelous, and I loved it. And
I just got to interrupt you for a minute, Leonard, because when I was doing the Bill Dana show, Bill was in California doing the show, and he called me in New York, and he said, I want you to come out and play the house detective on my show. We'll give you 7 shows. So I flew out, and the show was produced by Danny Thomas and Sheldon Leonard, who were very big wheels in the 60s. They had 4 or 5 hit shows on the air. So I came out and I did the first show, and after the first show, Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas called Bill over, and they said, where the hell did you get this guy? How many shows have you signed him to? What are you doing? And Bill said, what's wrong? I said, that voice. That's fingernails on a blackboard. And Bill said they laughed, and they said, oh, okay. And then when I was under contract to NBC, and they called me and said, we have a pilot here, we wonder if you'll be interested in it. And I said, well, it's the end of the pilot season, and Sheldon Leonard promised me he would write a pilot for me. And they said, well, don't you want to see the script? I said, no. They said, are you sure? I said, positive, absolutely don't want to see the script. I said, who wrote it? They said, Mel Brooks and Buck Henry. I said, I'll do it. I didn't care about the money, about anything. When I heard those 2 names, and then I read the pilot script, and it was so way out there that I absolutely fell madly in love with it. And then when we started doing it, I didn't think it was going to go. We were all kind of, if you remember, depressed because there was a lot of trouble making the pilot. We're out in the harbor and the boat with the cameras floated away. We were left on a raft. And there were 9 guys telling what was funny. You know, Howie Morris from the
Sid
Caesar show was directing. And so after we finished, we looked at the pilot and we looked at each other and we said, we better start looking for a new job. And then they had the affiliates dinner in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. And we looked at the pilot and said, well, there's about 6 funny minutes in it, really hilarious minutes in it. And the rest of it, so they called from New York and they said, listen, we got a lot of pilots to see this year, so we can't watch all of the pilot. Do you have 6 minutes? I said, do we have 6 minutes? Yep, we do. We went to the showing of the pilot to the affiliates in the Waldorf Astoria, and I was there, and the pilot got a standing ovation. So it shows what we know.
Now that we've heard how you came to the show, I was going to see if we could ask Barbara and Bernie to talk a little bit about how they came to the show.
I was sent excuse me, did you want to go
No,
first?
please, please. Ladies first.
Okay. I was sent the script. I had done a couple of guest appearances on Talent Associates shows, Mr. Broadway. Well, first was the George Scott show,
Yeah,
East Side, West Side. And then I did Mr. Broadway, and on Mr. Broadway I played an industrial spy who was 99, actually. And so when they were casting this, they remembered that character, and they sent me the script, and I loved it. I mean, I never know it's funny, you know, but I laughed out loud when I read this script. And so I said, yeah, I would love to do this. But then they said, you know, you have to sign for 5 years. And I thought, I'd be ancient in 5 years. My God, my life will be over practically. So I said, I can't possibly do it. And then later they came back and said, would you do it for 2? And
Would you?
would you believe 2? And so after I did it for 2 years, and then after that I wasn't about to give up, relinquish 99 to anybody else. And
Tell them how we almost didn't have you doing
oh
it.
my God.
When they were casting for...
No, after the
when
casting.
when they were casting for 99, we interviewed hundreds of girls, and we couldn't find anyone. And finally, one day, Buck Henry came to me and he said, listen, we have a screening of a girl in a show, and we want you to look at her because we think she's good. So I went into the screening room, and they showed me a scene with Barbara and that What was that show?
Mr. Broadway. It was, what's his name?
Mr. Broadway.
Yeah, what was the name?
It was
The guy.
Craig Stevens.
Craig Stevens.
Craig Stevens in Mr. Broadway. So I went in and they showed me the film and they said, what do you think? I said, fantastic. I said, absolutely fantastic. I said, she's so great. I said, do you think you can sign her? And Buck Henry said, we already did. And then I started to walk out of the screening room and they said, don't you want to see some more? I said, no, I've seen enough, that's it. And I turned and I looked back at the screen and Barbara, who was sitting behind a desk, stood up. And she was taller than Craig Stevens. And I said, wait a minute, how tall is she? She goes, oh, 5'2", 5'3". I said, are you telling me that Craig Stevens is a dwarf? I said, I know Craig Stevens, the man is 6'2". They said, well, she'll walk on the side of her heels.
And I did.
And we'll give you an apple box. So if you ever watch the show, in a long shot, Barbara is taller. In a medium shot, I'm standing on an apple box. But it all worked out.
You know,
And you both sat on the desk.
But I was,
Quite often.
I was talking about after we did the pilot and we were starting to shoot, and what happened, Barbara?
I was under contract to Revlon to do commercials for them, and at one point in my contract with them, about a year before, I had done a commercial for a deodorant that just ran for 6 weeks. It was just a special promotion, and that was all. I mean, for Revlon, I did Top Brass hairdressing, which was a hairdressing for men, and that's basically the only thing I did for them. But so when we started shooting, we'd already started shooting, I think, and it was Procter and Gamble, Sam Thurm. I'll never forget.
It was competitor. Yeah,
Yeah, they
competitor.
said, wait a minute, and they were doing the whole program, right? And
Right.
they said, wait a minute, we make a deodorant soap, and she once did a deodorant stick or roll-on. People are going to remember that she did that a year ago or whatever, and associate it with our deodorant soap and think that it's contrary to our soap. Therefore, she has to go.
Yeah.
And they had the power to get rid of me.
We had to start seeing other ladies.
And we tried everything. Revlon sent over to them a whole schedule of what I was going to do for the next year. There was no deodorant in it. They sent a letter. Sandy Buxbaum, who was the head of, one of the vice presidents of Revlon, sent a letter and saying, we will sign that we will never use Barbara for a deodorant. Nothing. I remember in the phone booth outside the studio over on the back lot of Paramount, finally, I called Sam Thurm myself, and he said, too bad, baby. Yes, that's what he said to me. And I still don't know why. They had come
Didn't
down
you go
to
back
this-
and see him?
I didn't,
thought
no,
that's-
later he got his picture taken with me. and
I
everything.
thought that's what turned it around. You went
No,
back
we
and
found a defect in their product.
it didn't work.
I don't know what did turn it around. Honest to God.
I don't know, I'm
His
hearing this for the
roommate-
first time.
No,
I
I
thank you
remember.
for
I
keeping it
thought
from
you.
me.
I thought you went back and saw him and talked to him, or maybe it was that phone conversation
Maybe
he
it was.
gave permission.
Maybe that's what did it. I don't know.
But I
it
remember
was-
we were not happily, because we sure didn't want to. We had to see other ladies, and we were already into like the third show, and we knew we couldn't replace you.
And NBC
nobody
was
was any
insisting
good.
on it too.
Pardon me?
NBC was insisting
Yeah.
that you get rid of me
Yeah.
too. And then Procter & Gamble relented for some reason. I still don't know why.
Well, when he said something about baby, and you said, I'll be there in a
Yeah, that's
couple
probably
hours.
it. So what did you have in mind?
How do all of you account for the enormous popularity of this show? I mean, we had such a wonderfully easy time to sell tickets to this evening. They were gone instantly.
Well,
It's
for
a
one
great
thing, it
tribute
was
to you.
funny.
Yeah.
And
It was funny.
it also anatomically worked. I will qualify this.
Yeah.
We could do tongue in cheek and foot in the mouth together. It was wit and spoof. And I think that was unique for television. Wit had disappeared. It had been a component in variety shows. certainly Sid Caesar, Steve Allen show, The Week That Was. And then it didn't find a place in situation comedy until Get Smart happened. I think that's one of the reasons we all responded to the script.
There was always something interesting about the show, too. The show, when you look back at them now, most of them were done on location, which complicates it. And it was a single camera show, which takes longer to do. And we were in Griffith Park a lot. We were all over the place, except for the desert show with Don when we gave him the sand.
Go ahead.
But it had a different look. The show had a different look than other situation comedies because most of those shows were enclosed, and you got a little claustrophobic after a while. And this was always opened up. You know.
And I feel there are two things. Number one, I mean, we had just wonderful writers, but Leonard would come up with these really, really funny, hysterical props and how to make them. The other thing was Don's catchphrases. I mean, I remember going to a baseball game when the show had been on the air about 3 weeks, and the baseball, and the guy in the stadium is announcing who the next batter is, and he makes some name up, and there's a silence, and he said, "Would you believe it's NIL?" and the kids really picked up on those catchphrases and the funniness of the show, and I think the parents started watching it from the kids.
Very true. If you think of Would You Believe, it's a marvelous structure. Of course, it starts out as a bluff, and then he plea bargains the bluff.
And missed it by that much. You could always find a way.
And
They were
when
great.
Don, we mentioned before the unique delivery, the first note I received from the network about the show said, "Please change Don Adams' strident delivery." 7 weeks later, on the Gemini 7 flight, something went wrong with a urine bag, and the control said, "Sorry about that, Chief," in Don Adams' voice. Became the most imitated voice in America that year.
We had a lot of trouble with the show as far as the actors that were cast in the show, because they didn't understand that they were not supposed to do comedy, that everything we did was serious, except what I did. So we used to get real good actors on the show. Harold Stone, who's a marvelous actor who was in Psycho, he was a psychiatrist, he was so happy to do the show because his kids wanted him to do it. And he came on the show, he played a ship's captain. It was in a show that Leonard wrote that won an Emmy.
Buck and I wrote.
Huh?
Buck and I wrote.
Yeah, Buck. It was a two-parter.
Ship of
Oh,
Spies.
the saltines where you have to
So-
whistle.
Yes.
Harold Stone came on, he's playing a ship's captain, has a peg leg. And I first come into his office, his room, and he stands up, and I look, and he says to me, "What's the matter? Haven't you ever seen a peg leg before?" And I said, "I was looking at the other one." So now, these are the lines that he has to say. I said, "How did that happen?" He says, "Have you ever heard of the great white whale?" I said, "That was done by the great white whale?" He said, "No, this was done by a small blue convertible." I said, "The great white whale was driving a small blue convertible?" Now, we do the scene, and Harold Stone is doing it like Henny Youngman or Milton Berle. "Oh, the great white whale is a hound." You're not supposed to be funny. Everybody had to play it absolutely straight for the comedy to work, right?
Absolutely.
What I remember of that show too, 'cause Leonard wrote it, and I think it was one of the funniest moments, when a spy comes into the cafe. Don's waiting in the cafe, and he's supposed to whistle to tell the chief or something. And he's sitting there, he's eating saltine crackers, and the guy walks in, and he tries to whistle. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried to whistle with saltine crackers in your mouth. It doesn't work, and it was, sorry, it was funny to me.
Was that Buck's favorite line in the Ship of Spies? The captain is named,
Oh,
Go ahead.
You're right. Buck set this up. The captain's name was Grauman, right?
Grauman.
Yes.
Captain
and
Grauman.
he had an Asian who was his assistant. And ultimately, Buck worked the script around to where he said, "Are you Grauman's Chinese?" Right.
That was Buck's favorite
Yes,
line.
yes.
Do the rest of you have favorite episodes? Do the rest of you have favorite episodes on the show? Or favorite stories from an episode?
Oh, God. I think all of them. I mean, watching those clips, I mean, if you heard us all in the front row, we were all laughing. I mean, to get back to that, it was really wonderful.
I'm going to ask one or two other questions of the general panel here, and then we're going to open it up for you in the audience. So start thinking of some good questions to ask here. What was it like directing on this show? Was it different from other shows you did,
Me?
Jay? Yeah.
Well, it was very lucky for me, because I produced the first year and then I left to do a show with Buck that lasted a fast 5 weeks, I think. And so, but I also knew this man had given me my first opportunity to direct. I directed a show called He and She. And I really knew that I wanted to direct more than produce. And so I decided I was going to become a director. And there just wasn't much work out there for somebody who hadn't directed. And they were nice enough to, whenever there was an opening, to let me come back and direct shows. And I must say, I hadn't really enjoyed being a producer, because producers, you just have all the problems and the worries and next week's script and last week's show in the editing room. But directing, you concentrate on what you're doing on the set, and it was so much fun to go back, and I just loved the experience. Plus, it was the only jobs I had for about a year.
I remember a fond memory. Dick Donner, who is now a very well-established and inordinately gifted director, did, I think, our 7th episode. It was the first time he was ever doing a comedy. So he was meticulous in everything he shot. And if you remember, it was a Western, the Indians for Washington 3. And first time we introduced the huge 300-foot arrow, the second largest arrow ever seen. And Dick, each day, the dailies ran several hours. He didn't want to miss anything, and he wanted to protect themselves. And finally, first time, dailies became weeklies. We were there an eternity, and to this day, whenever I see Dick, he says, "Have you forgiven me?" But
Dick Donner.
Donner,
Yeah.
yes. Sorry to awaken you.
Wonderful man.
Yes,
Wonderful man.
yes.
He did all the Lethal Weapon movies, and he's just a wonderful man. And
Yeah, we were very fortunate with our directors.
but I
We're
love
marvelous
that.
ones.
I love the script of that show,
Yeah.
because what happens in the beginning is they call the heads of the chief of staff of the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, and say, "We just found out that the war has been declared on the United States." And I said, "By who?" They said, "The Indians." I said, "India is declaring war?" And they said, "No, not that kind of Indian. You know, that kind of Indian." And so the Army chief says, "Well, we're not going to let a little band of Indians in Arizona push the United States around." And the Navy guy says, "You're perfectly right, General Custer."
Your retention is remarkable.
They had hijacked the Greyhound bus, is what I remember.
Oh, God, I don't remember that.
They'd taken and hijacked it.
Leonard, you mentioned you got some initial network notes on Don's voice. How was the network in general with you? Did they give you lots of notes? And what was the
They
nature?
were very, very responsive to the show. We got very few memos. We got a strange one that said, "Be sure to not portray in a grotesque or morbid manner the dead midget lying under the leaking toilet." We never intended the toilet to leak, so there was some imagination in that. But that was the extent, yes.
But we used to get trouble from the what are they, not to censors, what do they call them?
Bureau standards.
Continuity acceptance.
Continuity
acceptance.
Continuity acceptance. We were doing a show where the chief in 99 and I went into the swamp, and we were up to here in the swamp, and I said to the chief, "Chief, what is this?" And he said, "It's quicksand." And a note came down saying, "You cannot say quicksand." I said, "Why not?" They said, "Kids will be jumping into quicksand all over the country." I said, "I was born and raised in New York. I didn't see quicksand for a minute." So finally I said, "Okay," and I sat down and I rewrote the line. And this is the way it came out. "Chief, what is this?" He said, "It's synthetic sand." I said, "Is that anything like quicksand?" He said, "It's quicker." And they let that go through.
And Don mentions Ed Platt, and I must say, for every great comedian has a straight person who just reacts to him, who can do this. Straight person is the reality, is the audience listening, and Ed Platt was the best reactor, and he was such a good such a lovely man.
Jay's right, totally superb in those 15 minutes. The variety of reactions, the pain, the anguish, and yet the begrudging respect because this man got the job done. It was all there in each and every performance, and he was literally and irreplaceable.
And it was there, I'm sorry, it was there from the very beginning, because I was in the pilot. He had the character absolutely in place.
Startlingly good.
Yeah.
He was incredibly perfect for the part and brilliant.
Yeah.
It was so easy to work with him because he played that character. I don't know how the hell he played it. It's a difficult character to play against, my shenanigans. But he did it, and he did it straight, and you believed him.
Yeah. And he was a dear soul to boot.
Yes.
I also, as in hindsight, because I was a producer then, but now as a director, I realized how much Barbara Feldon added to the show, because there was, no matter what Max, no matter what the craziness Max did, you just saw this love in her eyes. And there was no romance, nothing going on from his point of view. He was so oblivious to the wonderful woman. And it was just, we were just very lucky in casting.
Very fortunate because we were able to write to that innate sweetness and goodness. And she was inordinately protective of Max. I remember a sequence where they're hiding and she says, "There's too much light." And Max takes out his gun and shoots one of the lights. And Barbara then says, "There's still another light." He says, "I'm out of bullets." And she says, "Why don't you try the switch?" And he said, "I'll try the switch." And she said, "Good idea."
Good idea.
Leonard used to sit in the editing room. When I directed, I didn't do any masters. I did an establishing shot, but I didn't do a whole master. And that used to drive Leonard crazy. He'd sit in the editing room, and there was no master, and he'd take his arm and smash it into the wall. So where's my
Cutaway.
Long shot?
yeah, because he wanted to be able to piece together every single part, and I didn't give him the chance to. I didn't shoot it. I had to save time. So
That's how we made up the 2 days.
well, what happened was there was a guy, Earl Bellamy, who was an old-time movie director. And we were doing a show where I walk across the bridge and there's a guy ready to commit suicide and jump off the bridge. And I turn around and I start to talk to him to try to talk him out of jumping off the bridge. And it's about a 9-page scene. And at the end of it, I said, "Well, if you want to jump, go ahead and jump." The guy jumps. So now I look and the camera's a mile away, and I said, Earl, what kind of a shot is this? Because I walked across and turned around and said, what are you doing? And Earl said, cut. And I said, what did we do wrong, Earl? He said, nothing. Go right to the end where he jumps off. So we did the last line where he jumped off. He did not shoot
In between.
a 9-page master. I said, how do you do that? He said, because I have it cut in my own mind. And he said, I'm not going to waste time doing a master that's an eye test. And I always directed that way.
In the projection room where we run the dailies, Leonard, as Don said, Leonard would pound the wall. He would do it constantly when a shot, and he wouldn't say anything to anybody. You just hear this bang, and eventually the wall had a hole in it. You know? And the thing, and at the same time, he had a habit of, I hope you don't do it anymore, we had those styrofoam cups, and he would chew, after he drank his drink, he would chew the edge. And the angrier he got, the smaller the cup got. I just bang the wall.
The banging was, I was unaware of that.
Yeah, they say that Leonard liked the dailies.
I
How many times did you hit
didn't
the
want to
wall? Only
comment.
3,
I
yeah, I
thought
liked it.
Everybody's going back to work. The dailies were midday, so I don't want to say anything negative, and I shouldn't do it. And I wasn't aware until one day Arnie Sultan sat to my right and took what was normally the seat I occupied.
wall.
And somebody said to him before I came in, I learned, that's Leonard's seat. He says, there are no reserve seats here. So something went wrong, and I went like that. And I caught Arnie. He said, take your seat. And that was the first time I was aware that everybody was aware of my banging the wall.
I want to give our audience a chance to ask some questions before we go too farther along.
Yeah, hi. Question for Don. It seemed like the Glick voice you did, it kind of got more subtle and it was softened over the years. You know, your voice, the actual.
What about my voice?
It's soft over the years. The show was on it kind of softened and got more subtle. Was there a reason for that?
Did he say, did I soften my voice?
Yes, he did.
It got more subtle.
I never used that voice in a show completely. I only used it on certain particular parts. But everybody thought that I was doing the same thing. I mean, I could talk like this, you know, Chief, let's go capture them, or I could say, Chief, it's time to go and capture. So I would mix it up. I would do it soft, and then I would do it sharp in that voice to get across certain punchlines. Because I thought it annoyed me. My voice always ignored me. I couldn't stand to listen to myself.
The memo was right.
Well, I was the assistant director of the Bill Dana show where Don did that, and no matter what Sheldon and Danny said, the audiences just would fall down laughing at Don. Not Bill necessarily, Don, but one of the reasons the voice was louder is because you do it in front of an audience and you tend to speak louder. Hi, Bruce. How are you? Hey. And in a one-camera show.
Is that Bruce Bilson?
Bruce
Bilson. Oh, my God, Bruce. Hi. I was wondering if you were here tonight. And Bruce Bilson, who directed a lot of our shows and won an Emmy for one show. Glad to see you, Bruce. Very few shows in those days, practically none, were shot with one camera, a film camera, with location, costumes. All of the comedy shows were done on one set, the kitchen and the living room, and a live audience. Get Smart was done like a movie. It was done with big production values. That's why we were $500,000 over budget after the third year. But it was done like a movie. No other comedy show ever did that. They always did it with tape, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, part of the other thing is that we didn't I don't know whether Leonard wants this story known or not, but Town and Associates, who produced the show, had an office in New York, and they weren't producing anything. Nothing was coming out of New York. So some of the budget that we were supposed to spend on the show would somehow find its way back to New York. And the network would say, why aren't you doing more locations? And we just didn't have, the first year, we just didn't have the money, because we were getting X amount of dollars for the network, but we didn't have it to produce the show. So we would have to put all these locations for 4 shows together.
I'm glad I came tonight. I'm learning an awful lot.
Hef, aren't you glad you came instead of having a gin game? It's my very close, very devoted, good friend, the editor of Playboy magazine, the founder of it, Hugh Hefner.
You want to tell the people about the origin of the voice and also the origin of some of the gag lines that became such classics?
The origin of the voice.
And the gag lines.
A guy named Powell.
Oh, yeah, William Powell. Yeah.
Oh,
Right, yeah. Well, when I was doing stand-up comedy, which I was doing for 20 years, I did a routine about a defense attorney. Your Honor? No, about what was it? Defense attorney. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for the past 20 minutes I have sat idly by while the prosecuting attorney has stood up here and made a complete ass of himself. Now it's my turn. So the way that I got that voice was I went to see a movie called The Thin Man, in which an actor called William Powell had a voice that was similar. It was clipped. It was a subdued version of what I was doing.
He'd say, all right, Nora,
What was
would you
his
like a
wife's
drink?
name?
Nora.
Nora? Where's Asta? Asta? Where's Nora? and I was, so in my routine, I used that voice. And then I was writing with Bill Dana, and I was writing a football coach. Bill and I were writing together. And I said, I don't want to use that voice, Bill. I said, it's annoying. And he said, you don't understand. He said, something that's mildly funny becomes terribly funny when you use that voice. I said, I don't know. So I had to do a cheer in this bit where I say, and now let's do the colored cheer. Boomalaka, boomalaka, boomalaka lock, laka boomo, looka booma boom, laka baka bak. And then I would start to read off my sleeve, rakataki tak two, arumadi, and it would go on. And I said, Bill, that's dangerous. If that falls flat, I'm out there with egg on my face. He said, I guarantee you, the longer you do it, the more they laugh. And he was right. I was tentative at first, you know, and then when I started to laugh after the second or third, I got brave.
It's a very, very interesting point brought up, that most comics, when Don was starting out, were capable of impersonating. But they had distinctive voices that they could impersonate, or body language, or styles. And today, the homogenizing of America has eliminated it. There are no impersonators as a result. They have no one to imitate. Isn't that interesting? The actors, I mean, you can do, it can be Ben Affleck or Brad Pitt. Something is wrong, and hopefully it'll correct itself. And a small speech. Yeah.
But
I'm
follow up on Mr. Hefner's question of where did some of these phrases come from? Because you had them when we did the Bill Dana show, the Would You Believes, and you already had those phrases.
where did you get the phrases?
Where did the phrases
Bill
come
and I wrote Would You Believe? And sorry about that.
Really?
And And Loving It came from a friend of mine, Joe Michaelis, who worked with Ernie Kovacs at that time. And he gave me, yeah, he gave me Ann Loving It. We were having dinner one night. He says, why don't you, when you're told how dangerous it is, say Ann Loving It. I said, what the hell is funny about that? And he said, try it.
Yep.
And I did. And I did. But let's see, what other phrases were there? The old something, the something, and the something.
That came on the boat.
Yeah, that came out of the show.
Yeah.
Missed it by that much.
And Missed It by That Much came out
Sorry
of the
about
show.
that. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that, Bill Dana and I wrote.
Be careful, you'll get some in your mouth.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
What was that from?
Giving a ship to spies in the bar.
Oh, yeah. Well, I stole that from a movie. That line was a movie called Veracruz with Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster. And they're drinking, and the guy that's playing the bad guy, I forget what his name is eating some chicken and slobbering all over, and the drink is all over his face. And I said to him, careful, some of that's getting in your mouth. And I put that in the
I asked
show.
you not to tell me that, where that one, I asked you not to tell me that, where that.
Oh, yeah.
I asked you not
Not
to tell me that.
Yeah, I asked you not to
Buck
tell me
Henry.
that.
Buck Henry?
Buck?
Came from the show, yeah.
Buck Henry. And Buck Henry, I'm all yours.
Do you have any favorite props that you use on the show? And do you keep any of them?
Do you know we did 138 or 139 shows, and I don't have one?
You don't have the shoe?
I don't have one Get Smart.
No,
You don't have a single film?
No,
I had all 138 of them, and I gave them to my daughter, and now I can't get them back. And she took my 3 Emmys, and I can't get them back. I said, I have other children. You know, that might want those Emmys. She's a tough luck.
A question way in the back, yeah.
Barbara, I have a comment for you and then a question. I just want to say that for me, in the history of TV, you set the standard for sexy, classy, and funny.
Such a standard for classy, for sexy, classy.
The question's a simple one. Any titles rejected before you came up with Get Smart?
No, the Get Smart was on the script, but we weren't sure it was a good choice because it sounded like, if you didn't know anything about it, a quiz show.
Yeah.
And we were very concerned. And then, of course, once the show started, it was the right title. Because I remember talking about it, and the argument for it, they say, would you have picked Oklahoma as the title for Oklahoma?
Yes, right here.
When you did the first Get Smart reunion, you did it as a feature film rather than a television movie, and I'm wondering how the origin of Nude Bomb came about as a feature rather than TV.
I'm deaf in to see, I'm sorry.
Is that to Don, that
Well,
question?
Well, I can answer. The Nude Bomb was, we sold the rights to Universal. And unfortunately, in this instance, it was an egregious error because they wanted to make a movie unlike the television show. Then why buy the television show? Just the title, The Nude Bomb, is bad. Our audience, we knew our audience, their ages, their composition, the demographics, if we believe any of that. And so it was totally wrong. And we had a remarkably unique villain because we had envisioned a couturier, gay, who wanted to dress the whole world. So he wanted to conquer them. They'd all be wearing his signature piece. And that seemed like great fun. Well, unfortunately, it was out of our hands. I was directing another movie at that time at Columbia, and I ran over to the Universal set as often as I could because I'd get these calls for help. Now you can pick it up from that end.
Oh, I'm sorry you asked that question. Because if you look in the dictionary under disasters, right next to the Titanic, you'll find the Nude Bomb. We had an English director who was a dramatic director, came over to my house. I showed him a tape of Get Smart where I said, would you believe 7 ships or whatever it was? And he said, I say, is that funny? And I got a pain. I said, my career is going into the toilet. Is that funny? I said, well, I don't know. Terrible. Please, nobody else ask that question.
Right in the back.
Another one of my favorite characters was the old chief. I can't remember.
William
his name.
Shallow.
Oh, William Shallow.
William Shallow.
Admiral.
He was so
The
good.
Admiral.
The Admiral.
Oh, Shallot.
The Admiral.
Yeah.
The Admiral. He used to say things like, give me a little push. Give a little push, you fall over. He said, the country is in bad shape. It may be the end of civilization as we know it. And I was saying, what are you going to do? He said, go on the air and tell everybody that everything is all right.
Whoa.
When can we expect to see all 139 episodes on DVD?
The Get Smarts are now owned by Warner Brothers. It's interesting in how many hands they have been, but Get Smart belongs to Warner's, and I imagine they, if you want to do acquire the rights to do a sequel, and I think they're talking about it now, making another movie. They have to be, you have to deal with Warner Brothers, and I think that when they see it's advantageous to convert it into DVD, they'll do it.
If they did a Get Smart movie, I would like Eric to be Maxwell Smart. Eric from Will and Grace. I think you would be perfect with me.
I've waited my whole life to hear you say that.
Would you believe 3 weeks?
I actually wanted to ask a question. The show existed in a time period where style changed so much, and when it began, it was so in its look, it was so Cold War, with Siegfried and the thin ties, and then by the end of it, you were Mike Brady. Was that something that you naturally did, or was it pressure from the network to stay current in your look? I mean, Barbara became so colorful, and your jackets with the wide lapel. Did you fight that, or did you actually go with the show?
No, we had designers working with the show continuously, and we just kept current. I don't think consciously, but it was just that we be of the period and the time.
And those were the clothes that were out there
Yeah.
then, in terms of the high fashion that was out there.
Well, also, once you got married, the whole character changed, She was, once Barbara's character got married, the two of you got married, I think the
Barbara's-
character went a different way.
Bobby's character was so perfect for me. I cannot tell you. I just cannot tell you. Those 5 years were the happiest years of them. I couldn't wait to get to the set in the morning. I didn't care if we worked till 11 or 12 at night. But it was just so much fun to do. And the reason that it was a lot of fun to do, because my sense of humor, it tends toward a little black comedy. And I never thought they would allow us to do what we did on television in the 60s. I thought they would clamp down on us, but we had a staff of writers who were loose cannons. They would write anything. And that's because it was satire. People said, well, it was, what is the opposite of satire?
Good answer. He said UPN.
It was like opposite of pie in the face.
Yeah, we do owe a lot to two Arnies, Arnie Rosen and Arnie Sultan, who wrote a high percentage of our scripts and actually produced our shows.
And we
They're
can't forget
missed.
Buck. Buck Henry's
Oh,
mind.
amazing.
well-
Those of you who don't know Buck Henry, he went on to do wonderful things, but I think Get Smart was the first time that he'd done something every week. And between Leonard and Buck, Leonard would come up with these crazy ideas and Buck would write them, and Don and Barbara would act them. And I mean, it was really a well-written show. If you look back at some of this material, it's really funny. And you don't do that without really good writers.
And one thing pridefully, we did not make abusive use of the laugh track. We actually screened our shows and learned where the audience laughed and then put the laughs in there. We did that as much as we could. I find a laugh track offensive, and it may have led to the lowering of standards in comedy. And it may have led to a whole generation who have a Pavlovian response to hello as being funny. You know what I'm saying? They hear it and they hear it and they think that they...
I didn't watch the show, the reruns. I didn't watch the shows. I watched the pilot. And after the pilot, I never watched another Get Smart until 20 years later. And that was because it offended me in the pilot, the laugh track. I would come into a room and say, "Hello, 99," and the guy would push the goddamn button. And I said, what the hell is funny about hello? So I never watched until like 20 years later, and then I watched and it didn't bother me.
Well, I think it was used discriminately. We tried at least. Bert, was down there.
We always toned it down, and we worked with really good people. And most of the times it would be, I'd be sitting with them and I'd say, "That's not funny, there's no laugh there. Don't let silence is better." But they were wonderful. That was the magic box. They had,
You need somebody good. The Writers Guild had a sketch once, marvelous sketch, actually performed by Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, who two guys who worked the laugh track, sweetened the track, and by error they given Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's just marvelous. 8 hilarious minutes.
The reason 20 years later that I watched the reruns, I loved it because, first of all, you never grow old. Barbara's, beautiful then, she's beautiful today, but she'll never grow old as long as those Get Smarts are shown. I will never grow old as long as they're shown.
And Bernie will always be German.
Yeah.
Well,
I did marry an Austrian.
We only unfortunately have time for one more question, so this lady right in front.
Given your enormous talent for comedy, this is for Don, Barbara, and Bernie, would any of you consider doing dramatic roles now if offered?
I would.
Well, I've done them through the years, and I just finished doing a play actually in New York. It's
For television or movie?
I have tried to get acting parts, dramatic parts, for 30 years, and they look at me and say, "Come on."
Yeah.
You're not going to go, "Hello, Phyllis, I'm here at Wuthering Heights."
You know something, the thing about doing a comedy show as opposed to doing a dramatic show, because I did a lot of episodes on dramas after Get Smart, is that it's not fun. You go onto the set of a comedy and it's fun. There's a lightheartedness to it, and when you begin doing the material, you laugh a lot, and the immune system just loves that. And your spirit just blossoms that way. When I noticed, because when you studied acting and then you do a series that's a comedy series, and so you think, well, nobody realizes that I can do all this heavy drama stuff. And then I got an opportunity on a number of occasions to do it, and I did it, but to cry all day is not a good way to spend your day.
As far as dramatic stuff, through Talent Associates, I got to play the boss's son in the Lee J. Cobb CBS revival of Death of a Salesman, and Leonard Stern, the savior.
Gifted soul. No.
Well, you did Love Boat too, Bernie.
My so
Not a
dramatic,
bad thing.
my so dramatic acting was back in 1960 or 61. I was under contract to Perry Como to do the Perry Como show with Kate Ballard and Paul Lynde and a bunch. We do sketches on the Perry Como show. I was under contract to him for 2 years. And my agent, I used to call my agent and say, I want to go and audition for dramatic roles. He said, but you're under contract to Perry. I said, I know, but I love to read because I'm a great cold reader. He said, all right, they're casting a show called Harold with Anthony Perkins, and it's the second lead. I said, get me in. So I went down to audition. And there was Anthony Perkins and San Suber, the producer, and they gave me a script, and I went out and I started to read it. I said, when they hear this, they're going to fall out of their seats. I was so bad, I couldn't believe it. And I thought, I'm a great cold reader. What happened? So I stopped reading. They said, what's wrong? I said, no, nothing. I have an audition. I have a rehearsal with Perry Como. They said, well, what's wrong? I said, I don't like the way I'm reading. They said, well, why don't you take it off stage and study it and come back and do it again? And I said to myself, if that was a cold reading, imagine what will happen if I learn it. So they said, can you come back tomorrow? And I wanted to get out of there. And I said, what time? They said, 11 o'clock. Now, I knew I had rehearsal and a golf appointment. So I said, right, sure. So I went home, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was up to go golfing. And it rained, so I couldn't go golfing, and the script was on the coffee table. At that time, I had a photographic memory. And I sat down, and in 3 hours, I memorized the entire script. So I went back at 11 o'clock, and I came out, and they said, where's your script? I said, I don't need a script. They said, you don't need a script? I said, no, I know the play. They said, well, page 28, do it with the AD. And I came out blasting away, acting up a storm, bouncing off the wall, reverberating all over the place. And they said, that's amazing. You know the whole script? I said, yeah. They said, you're hired. I said, well, I can't do it. They said, what, is this some kind of joke? I said, no, I'm under contract to Perry Como. And they said, well, why did you come down here? I said, I like to read. So they said, well, see if Perry will let you out of your contract to do this show. And I said, I'll ask him. I went to Perry. I said, I have a chance to do a dramatic show with Anthony Perkins. And he said, okay, how long will you be? I said, we'll be out 4 or 5 weeks on the road, and then we open on Broadway. He said, all right, when you come back, you'll come back with me. So now I'm hired to do this part, which is an enormous part. And at reading, they had all the professional stage actors. I mean, these were dramatic, wonderful stage actors. And I'm a stand-up comic. So now we're at rehearsal, and I'm blasting away. And here, bang, and boom. And they're mumbling. And I'm saying to myself, these are professional Broadway stage actors? Jesus. I went home, my wife Dorothy said, how did it go? I said, let me put it to you this way. There's Sir Laurence Olivier, and there's Sir whatever it is, and then there's me. I said, I probably am one of the great actors in the history of the Broadway theater. 2 weeks later, I'm and they're coming out of their roles. And the roles are taking place, and they've reached inside, and they've become the characters they become. And I said, shit. I'm in big trouble. I went home, my wife Dorothy said, how did it go? I said, there's Alan Ladd, George Graff, and me. So the director was Larry Blyden, who made me do an impersonation of him. And I said, that's overacting. He said, there's no such thing as overacting. I said, okay. We opened in New Haven. Next day, paper came out. Don Adams has a tendency to overact. I said, Larry, look at this. He said, what did they know? Anyway, the show opened on Broadway and lasted, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. The reviews weren't bad. It was word of mouth that killed it.